Um, we have an incredible number of Salesforce users use our platform, and this actually shows 4,000. I think it's actually I believe it's actually crossed over 5,000 now. So we actually got our start in the Salesforce ecosystem. In fact, when we first launched the product 4 years ago, it was only available for Salesforce users. You actually had to log in to Workato using Salesforce. That continues. We also have an incredible number of reusable integrations. We call them recipes. There's over 10,000 recipes that sort of are around Salesforce use cases. Some of the popular use cases are, the biggest one by far is quote to cash. Essentially, an order comes in to Salesforce, and then, or rather, a new a request for an order or an opportunity that is won. And then when that happens in Salesforce, set up downstream actions, including create an order in your financial systems. Again, a lot of NetSuite, Oracle EBS, SAP. We also see Workday Financials there too. And of course, sort of in the mid-market and lower, we do see a ton of QuickBooks and Dynamics ERP actually. Another sort of very popular use case is around case management. Salesforce is the customer-facing application, and then whenever there's a customer issue, it sort of originates in Salesforce and goes into applications like ServiceNow, Zendesk, and so on. And of course, sometimes ServiceNow, and then it cascades into Jira if there's an engineering issue. A lot of customer onboarding, which is very similar to code to cash, but actually in some cases it can be quite interesting. Where one of the very popular ones that we have seen is partner onboarding for very large tech companies, where there's an incredible amount of partner interest. They automate those workflows. That includes, getting signatures through DocuSign. It includes creating partner accounts in the downstream apps like Box and so on, and within Box creating folders, putting the signed documents in the right folder. So a very large set of use cases there as well. Collaboration, I think we're going to touch upon this quite a bit today, but collaboration, more than a use case itself, we see it being used in a lot of use cases. So, it's a big part of code to cash or case management. So it's really, I would say, more of a derivative use case. And of course, a lot of use cases where they're taking data from Salesforce, putting it into large data warehouses. We see Redshift all the time. So here, the use case itself is simple in the sense that you're taking data from A to B. Even the mappings are relatively straightforward, but a lot of this is around throughput. How fast can you get large amounts of data out of Salesforce, but also into Salesforce as well? So we'll talk about that. And of course, Salesforce being really the sort of the Uber customer app, tons of use cases that it's hard to sort of categorize them. Before we jump in, I think as 3D talked today, we're going to have a little bit more of a use case or solution focus, if you will. But before we get into that, some of the key features that help you do more complex use cases. The first is custom SQL. If you guys have sort of used Workato before or were in our Salesforce webinar last week, there's a lot of support in the product for working with objects where you don't even have no SOQL. You can directly, register interest in a new opportunity being created and so on. But we also support custom SOQL, which essentially is very handy when your downstream application think about a use case where you're taking, each time there is an opportunity won in Salesforce, you actually want to create the customer for the very first time, let's say in SAP. So oftentimes the information required to create the customer in SAP requires information from a lot of related objects. So with custom SOQL, in a single query, you can actually do a complex join, get all the information that your downstream app like SAP may need, so you don't go back and forth and sort of incur a lot of API overhead. Julian, do we have some examples that we can show here?
We do have an example. Let me retrieve it. So I have a recipe here that shows you how we use a SOQL query. So if you expand this right now, so we have a trigger that is a scheduled object search using SOQL. And just to add on a little bit to what Gautam was saying, right? So adding complex joins and generic objects are all supported in our triggers without requiring like you to know SOQL query language, like Salesforce Object Query Language. And the kind of functionality that SOQL introduces is kind of the ability to use different kind of operators, not just like equals, right? Like your filters, you don't just have to say when something equals this, but you can say like greater than or less than. So close date, we could say close date greater than this month, less than this month. We could say opportunity amount greater or equals or less than this amount. So it gives you a lot more flexibility in configuring your filters to fetch records back. So in this case, I'm just using close date equals this month. So I'll fetch a list of records which closes on this month. And over here, I've set my schedule to run like once a month. I've set my batch size to 100. So every time, like every month, my trigger will return me list of opportunities in
classic
sizes
use case that we see here is where every end of the week we see queries being done to figure out what are the important opportunities that are pending to be closed for that quarter. Right, so that would be a good use case, Julian, here.
Yes, that's kind of the use case here. So you can send like a manager, a sales team manager can send a list of opportunities that are closing this week or this month on a weekly basis, monthly basis to a sales team channel or chat. So everyone is on board with like what are the deals closing this month, or you can set it to send notifications about what are the most important deals with the highest amount. So you can say order by like, opportunity amount descending. So everyone knows what are the critical deals to close for that month. So you can also do that with like more than opportunities, right? Tasks, subtasks, so different things.
So there's a question, does one need to know SOQL to use this, or does it automatically generate the SOQL?
This particular, if you look at all the triggers and actions that Workato supports, to use those, you don't need SOQL. You don't need to understand SOQL. We generate the query in those cases. But there are cases where when you want to be especially in cases where you're getting data from different sources, or you have a very specific criterion where this trigger can be used. So, but to use this trigger, yes, you have to know SOQL. But that's kind of this is like a power use case. Okay. But the rest of the triggers and actions, you don't need to know SOQL.
We do have a link here to like the Salesforce documentation about SOQL, which is pretty well documented, and is I think it's pretty simple to pick up. So you could always explore that if you're interested in using SOQL. I think one last thing I wanted to cover.
Yeah.
For that. And actually, like this is not only for the SOQL trigger, but is for all our Salesforce triggers. Is this like concept of a join? So when you're fetching something, a record from Salesforce, say in this case I selected opportunity record, I can fetch additional records joined to this opportunity in the same query. So in this case, I'm saying like when you fetch me the opportunity, I also want the account information, so that I can like maybe filter by account size or like a account, company revenue, something like that. That will help me score this account better, right? And then over here I can.
And you can have multiple related objects, right?
That's right. That's right. So based on the record you pick, like opportunity in my case, I can see all the related records available for picking as well. And in this case, in the fields selector, I can select specific fields I want. So this is like these two fields and related objects kind of are the like the select clause and the from clause in your SOQL query. But this related objects and fields feature is available across our Salesforce Connector's triggers. So you don't need to know SOQL in order to use this joins feature.
And the purpose of also being able to do a field level selection is for having more optimized queries, right? So if in case you're doing a join across 4 different related objects, and then you don't want to end up with a Cartesian product of all those fields, you would go here and say, these are only the fields that I want. So it can be very efficient.
That's right. That's right. So if you like, I think Salesforce like objects can have hundreds of fields, and if you can streamline this, it would really make a huge impact on performance, especially for like bulk BI, ETL type cases where you're syncing like batches of 1,000, 2,000 records at one time.
Cool. And the next feature, it actually is used in so many use cases, is the concept of batch and bulk. So if Workato users, you may sort of know that by default, most of Workato's actions and triggers, they operate on a single object, which is really great, especially if you think about a code to cache use case. You want to essentially process them in real time. So as soon as when a new opportunity is won, you want to do downstream order processing. But there are times, I mean, especially sort of the use cases around BI and analytics, where you actually want to process them, for a higher throughput. So one concept that we support is the notion of batch. So instead of processing 1, you can actually say that I want to process them 1,000 at a time. So that way you get significantly higher throughput, because every single Workato job, instead of just working on a single event or object, it operates on 1,000 at a time. And this is configurable. You can you can configure it anywhere from depending on the connectors. In some cases the max is 1,000, some cases it's even 10,000. And then this in combination with parallel processing, you could say that I want to I want to have a batch size of 10,000. Then I want to have parallel processing of 5, means that Workato would process 50,000 records at a time. So that's again purely for throughput. And the other feature for similar use cases is bulk. But in this one, we actually use Salesforce's bulk action. So where you essentially can a lot of the use cases that we see is both, but we see a lot more of data going into Salesforce through bulk. And while sort of could we show that? I think it's a lot easier to explain how bulk works with.
So bulk would be here, like this recipe tries to show bulk actions. So
yeah, and again, bulk operates on an object, right? So you basically get to say, and an easy sort of way to remember which are bulk operators is those are the ones that have this label batch or bulk assigned to it. And then once you,
I think we have create, we have update, and I think we have upsert.
Okay.
For bulk. Mm-hmm.
And then again, it sort of operates on a object. So once you select that, you select which object you want to sort of operate in bulk mode. And then the input to this, unlike a typical action, is a list, right? Because you're passing, what you're essentially sort of doing is you want to process 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 at a time. You basically need to give a list that contains that information. So that is why the input source is a list. And then, of course, just like with any other action, you get to map at the field level. Yeah.
So I think in this case, we are like, the sample scenario is whenever users fill out a form in Workato on our webpage, we collect a list, right? And we get a list of these leads, and we like bulk move them into Salesforce.
And we actually see a lot of bulk use cases with Salesforce to Salesforce Marketing Cloud as well, right?
We do see that, yes. Like users move their leads from Salesforce into Salesforce Marketing Cloud for like more control over their marketing campaigns and better monitoring of the leads activity. Yeah.
And one of the cool features that is actually it is in beta right now that is coming in this area is where today when you use our bulk action, each bulk action in Workato corresponds to one bulk action in Salesforce. Versus sometimes you actually want to load up 5 million records. And then you want to operate on all 5 million records as a single batch. So this new feature that is in beta allows you to add more objects to an existing open Salesforce job. So basically, you can sort of you can take your time assembling all these records. You start a bulk job, then you assemble all the records across several Workato jobs, and then you can say, okay, I'm done. Now go off and process it. So that's a really cool feature where in a single you can basically do this, process large volumes of record in a single Salesforce bulk job. It's a little confusing. There's a Workato bulk job and a Salesforce bulk job, but I think those of you that know how Salesforce bulk jobs work would sort of relate to that.
Since we're here, like, should I dive in a little bit into like the list and the mapping?
Okay.
No, I just wanted to highlight, like whenever you're in a leads, in a source list input field, like this is the icon for a list, right? Signifying that this takes in a list. And on the other hand, whenever you click on an input field for a list, you will only ever see pills for a list in the data tree. So this is how you know, like, to map the right data pills for a list into the input field. And then like typically the field mappings for anything within that list should come from that list. So the activities list. Yeah, so like this is typically how we deal with like bulk movement of data in Workato.
So bulk, batch, or any kind of list processing.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so William, there's a question. Under how do you recommend when to use bulk batch versus event-based processing? Like, what are the things that you could do in event-based that you cannot do in bulk and batch, and vice versa?
Okay.
So I think performance-wise, like bulk and batch, typically they use less API calls, right? So for example, you could a single trigger event for batch and bulk could hold like 5, 10, 20, depending on how much activity is happening in your Salesforce instance organization. So performance-wise, I think batch and bulk are better. But if you need real-time notifications, for example, like you want to capture leads immediately when they're logged, you want to capture call logs, tasks immediately when they're logged, or like customer cases, critical customer cases, you want to push from Salesforce into like your issue management systems. If you want those to happen in real time, typically it is on a transactional, like, event-based basis. And you will be using like your real-time triggers for that. So we do have a new object or like new updated object, real-time triggers, which are marked by the green tag.
Okay, no, that's good. I guess it really is based, I guess, to sum it up, it is the use case. Another way to think about it is, if you have, let's say, like I think you were talking about customer support, you have your Salesforce being the front line, and then you have someone using Zendesk, and these things are integrated. You want to have the same information in both applications in nearly real time. So there's basically both sides are looking at the same information. So when a customer calls, you know exactly what the status is. So in those type of use cases, you cannot really rely on bulk or batch. And then the downside of real-time processing is throughput, because every event results in multiple API calls, versus if you're trying to do large amounts, if you're doing large batches, you can reduce the number of API calls. But more than even the calls, I would say throughput is your biggest reason to do bulk and batch.
That's right. So if the scenario is like business intelligence, moving of mass data from Salesforce out into another like database system, then that's not time sensitive. You could do it on a daily basis or weekly basis, right? So yeah, it really depends on your use case.
Then sort of, I guess, a good segue to the next topic is, how do you do real-time processing? Essentially, sort of when we say real-time processing here, we mean it from the context of Salesforce. So as soon as something happens in Salesforce, how do you take action in essentially with nearly zero latency? There's two capabilities that we support here. One, of course, is the newer platform events functionality that Salesforce released about late last year, where you can essentially create an event, and then Workato is actually able to subscribe these events in real time, and then we can sort of do downstream processing. The other has been sort of around for some time, is essentially you can create a workflow rule in Salesforce that triggers off that Workato trigger relies on for, I would say, near zero latency. I mean, there's it depends on the rules and what other rules are there, but again, it gives you close to the least amount of latency. Do you have some recipes for that, Julian?
I do have some recipes when it comes to workflow rules. So I haven't set this up because I wanted to show like briefly, right, like how the flow goes. So whenever you select a new object or new updated object, real-time trigger in Salesforce Connector, this shows up, right? And this asks you to like this. So this endpoint URL is what we need to provide to Salesforce, because we need to tell Salesforce, hey, like this is the URL address to send events to as soon as they happen. So when you're setting up your workflow rule in Salesforce, you need to provide this endpoint URL. And we try to generate this, well, we do generate this endpoint URL for you once you've configured your trigger. So
and then you just cut and paste it from here and put it in Salesforce?
Exactly. So right now, like, we don't have one yet because you need to connect to Salesforce. So let me just do a quick connection to Salesforce. And now this changes tell me to select an object in order to get the endpoint URL. So then I'll select a lead object maybe. And once I've done that, then my endpoint URL is given to me. And this like utilizes, your company your Salesforce organization ID and your specific object you've selected. And then you go into your Salesforce setup panel, and you should go into your workflow rules section. And this is where you create a new rule and you use this endpoint URL when asked for it. And you can always like follow through to this article to find out how to set up your real-time triggers in Salesforce.
Okay. So basically what we are doing here is that the workflow rule that we're creating in Salesforce, we're saying that when something happens to this object, then post this information to this inbound web, the Workato's inbound webhook, which is what that URL is.
That's right. That's right. So all notifications. So in this case, like I want to set up a workflow rule so that whenever a new lead is created in Salesforce, it pings my recipe. So I have the URL for that particular recipe, ensuring that all all notifications for new lead created will be sent to that recipe. Okay. So like we do need to set out that workflow rule before we run this recipe.
And so that's basically sort of how and with workflow rules, within in that particular case, it was a single object. But could you have more complex rule and pass in data from multiple objects?
For workflow rules in Salesforce, you can't do that. So you can only carry data from a single object. Because that's how the workflow rule in Salesforce
the
is
workflow rule is tied to a single object. Okay.
That's right. And not all objects will support workflow rules. So some objects you just can't do real time.
What about custom objects? Does Salesforce support workflow rules for custom objects?
They do.
Okay.
From what I recall, they do.
Anything else you want to add on the workflow rules?
Not the workflow rules, but I think for real time you also mentioned platform events, and I just wanted to like quickly. I
was going to
I see. I didn't.
So
Oh, all right.
So I think one of our the viewers added a note saying that it is important to sort of to communicate that you need to have a field that is checked on or off when the recipe is triggered and then completed.
I think. Oh, okay. I think I understand. I think I understand this question. So I think one of our viewers is mentioning that if the workflow rule has not been created and activated, then the real-time notification doesn't happen, right? So if you didn't, so for example, let me look at a lead webhook that I've set and we've created. So this is a workflow rule we have created. So the criteria is like, whenever if the lead created date is not now, then it happens. So like essentially, if you have a lead, the created date will always be not now. So this webhook will always fire whenever a lead is created. Right, this is how we ensure that this workflow rule always happens. And we have this outbound message where we configure the endpoint URL. So whenever like this happens in Salesforce, outbound message happens and sends the lead data over to Workato. And if you don't make this active, or if the workflow rule has not been built correctly, then the workflow rule will not take effect. And I think you can still run the recipe in Workato, right? We won't stop you. But what happens is the instant real-time notifications will not happen. So if you like are testing, so start your recipe and like create a couple of like events, and if it's not showing up on your recipe, that means you need to troubleshoot the workflow rule you have created. And something I just wanted to add, right, is that webhooks are sometimes unreliable in the sense that when they get sent by the application, sometimes like they may get lost due to like network issues, and they don't reach out like Workato. And to like mitigate this, we have a polling system in place. So in the sense that we are always checking for events continuously for you in this recipe. So you will never lose any events that Salesforce has sent you.
So, continuing on, the other way to do real-time notifications from Salesforce out is to use platform events, and this is actually a cool use case that we did for a very large US customer that has a bank of Zebra printers, and anytime a printer goes down, they have an incredible amount of I guess cost in terms of resources that work on the lines are not able to work, packages can't be shipped in time, and so on. So what the use case where we helped them was each time there is an adverse event detected in the printer, Workato processes sort of identifies that event and publishes it out on Salesforce as a Salesforce platform event, which then is picked by multiple downstream components. One of the downstream components here, again, happens to be Workato, which actually sort of picks it up and essentially sort of, gets into triage mode. It creates a ticket in Jira, notifies people on Slack and so on, and also, uses Twilio for text messaging. The recipe for that, again, is no different. I mean, it is part of the Salesforce trigger. You can just go, you can go into the, you can create a recipe where you pick a platform event, and then again, it says, what are the available events? You select the event. It works very similar to any other Workato trigger. So we'll sort of continue back. Then the other, we see a lot of this, and I think you guys probably also, folks that have been on previous product hours would have heard us talk about this. I mean, it's a fancy way of saying, how do you, we call it conversational integration, but what it really is the ability to work with any of your application from places that you are already spending a lot of time in. So it could be Slack, it could be Teams, it could be your favorite chat tool. You can also sort of work with text messaging. So what Workato does is, we have a bot platform where it allows you to define conversational interactions with any of the applications or any of the workflows that you build on top of it. We have some examples for this.
We do have an example. So let me just kind of set out the use case we have built out for this example for conversational integration. So do you want to, Gautam, do you want to? I have it over here. Okay. So it's essentially, I think the use case is you might have a sales team who are always moving, right? And they're talking to your customers, to your prospects, and they're in and out of meetings. And sometimes I think your sales team might register a request for you to give a discount or to give a better for a prospect, right? So in this use case, I'm going to show.
So this is we're going to demo this is the demo part.
This is the demo part.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I see. Yes, less more demoing.
So I just wanted to add a couple of things. The use case today we're going to talk about it in the context of sales approvals, but this applies to any sort of any sort of use case that it could be in HR, it could be in finance, it could be in any category. It could be even for when you're using an application where you order supplies for the company and so on. In this case, in the use case is that there is a sales team, and the sales teams can only give X% discount, but they want to give more than that amount of discount. They actually have to get a manager to approve that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. That was a lot more succinct than what I was going for. Okay, so let me show you the demo. So a sales rep. checks is like no, they can so this is how I want to like start my recipe, but Workato can automatically pick up any newly created, deal support request. And what happens is, so I'm logged in as the approver on this channel. So I'm seeing that our our chatbot has posted a notification about this newly created deal support request, right? To offer 10% off for an extension of the subscription. And like I have data about this account, about the opportunity amount, and I'm tagged to look at this to approve or reject it.
So so here, I mean, since sort of a lot of, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of Salesforce experts in. So what we're trying to do is for the opportunity object in Salesforce, we are using Salesforce's object approval capability, right?
That's right.
So we are. But in this case, I think we're doing it as part of the recipe where when the Salesforce user checks on the opportunity that I need an extra discount, then the recipe kicks in, and then it actually sort of requests, it sort of initiates a approval object in Salesforce. It creates that, and then it sends this notification to this to this channel.
That's right.
So basically, this is being tracked in Salesforce, and there isn't this particular opportunity object will be approved or not.
That's right.
When you click
exactly. I can delve in quickly into the recipe that powers this, right? So if you can see here, whenever a deal support request in Salesforce is created or updated, and if like someone checks the sales notification checkbox, we get opportunity details, account details related to this deal support request, right? And then we post it into Slack, which is what we see here, all the details that's relevant for an approver to make a decision on whether to approve or reject it. And then, we're going to submit this object for approval in Salesforce. And over here, so I'm logged in as the approver. So should I just go ahead and approve it? And what you see here is that we will ask anyone trying to approve or reject this request to log into Salesforce and verify that they actually really do have the permissions in Salesforce to approve or reject this. So
this is important because it is going to a channel, and in the channel there are multiple participants, but only a handful of those participants can actually approve this request.
That's right.
So that is why we sort of come back and say, hey, okay, it says that this person, McNeil,
Logan McNeil,
is the one that is allowed to approve it. So we want to check to see if the person that is actually trying to do the approval is in fact Logan McNeil.
That is right. So this is an extra step for if you want to post notifications to a whole team, right? If you want the whole team to be notified about what is currently happening. You can also like send this as a direct message to only the approval. And then in that case, this verification step can be optional, or you can also put it in just to make sure. So in this case, if you log into Salesforce, you would see that, once you have successfully been authorized, you'll see that this has been approved.
And now that sort of it was verified that this particular person is, they are who they say they are, and in this case that they are the ones with the current approver, by sort of having them authenticate themselves, the approval for the opportunity object in Salesforce is done on behalf of Logan McNeil.
That is right.
Can we see that?
So if you go over to the opportunity, This should bring you to, oh, okay, so this brings you to the deal support request. And if you go to the opportunity, you should be able to see, these are the requests, right? Like someone has submitted against it, and you should be able to see like it's been approved.
Okay, got it. And so here we are taking advantage of Salesforce's approval objects capability.
Approval objects. That is right. So
how do those actions look?
Okay. So I was just going to go into it. So this is the recipe that's listening to the users click on approve or reject, and when the user selects approve or reject, if the status was approved, then we go ahead to approve that object in Salesforce. So in this case, just select the object to approve, and then the approval process to follow.
So the object to approve is the input to that is an object ID.
Is the object ID? That's right.
I see.
And because an object can be in multiple approval processes, you need to tell us like what is the approval process you are initiating here. And if someone with the wrong permissions try to click on it, then it will fail, right? In Slack and in Salesforce, the attempt to approve or the attempt to reject will not be recorded.
Okay. Helen, there are two questions. One is this seems pretty interesting, even though I've seen this multiple times. Is it the question is it possible to fetch information from other applications that will help with making the approval decision?
Definitely.
Or is it only limited to Salesforce?
Definitely. So you could move data from multiple applications into the where it's displayed, right? Where it's shown for the decision maker to make a decision. So if you go back to the first recipe, so where we are listening to this deal support request in Salesforce, so in the actions, we can always get more details about this customer, this opportunity, what have we done recently with them, and
also so we are constructing that message in one of these steps, right? The post, command, reply, and so on. And in this particular case, all the information is coming from Salesforce. But you could sort of go look up ServiceNow if you want,
right?
And then it will show up on the right-hand side in your data tree, and then you can drag and drop and compose the message. So there are no restrictions that Workato places on the data source. You can
I think one of the questions, I missed the part, which is like based on their past, like if it's an annual renewal, what was the last average contract value? And if you wanted to look that up, and if that information is in your ERP or financial system, can you pull that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And yeah, people do that all the time. I mean, we see pulling records from financial systems and also the customer incident management system. So again, both are super pertinent to the approval process. So yes, and there's two ways to do that. One is every time this event is published, here in this case in Slack, you can bring all that information together. But you can also sort of have in Slack saying that you could have, when this information is posted, we could have a follow-up question saying, hey, do you want to know this customer's order history for the last 6 months? And they can just click that button, and then we can pull those records. So it really depends on what kind of user experience you want to create.
Okay. The second question is fairly interesting, which is if this interaction were to happen on Slack or any other interface other than Salesforce, meaning the approver says not 10%, can you make it 7.5%, or how can that be orchestrated through this workflow? Or
I mean, the logic, the rules of under what circumstances you seek approval, that can be part of the recipe.
Okay.
So, it can be much more complex than just a percentage discount. It could be, what is the level of discount for this region and so on. So you could have all of those sort of, that logic in your recipe. And I think, in fact, even from a approval workflows perspective, the way recipes work, you don't also have to rely on Salesforce approvals. I think in this use case, we use Salesforce object approvals, but Workato can do the approvals and track it inside Workato also.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I think right now the scenario we have is an app pushes information into like Slack or Teams for you to do something with, but you could also push information back into Salesforce, right? So you could build workbot recipes that listens to what you're saying. Maybe you say maybe you want to comment on this object and say that 10% is too much. Let's set 6% instead. So you could build a separate workbot recipe that takes your reply and brings it back into Salesforce as a comment, right? For the sales rep to like adjust this value and stuff like that. So I think like one thing I wanted to mention was we kind of rolled this specific use case out for a couple of customers, and I think what the team liked about this was that it was very mobile, right? So they could do this easily when you're on the go, and because of this, because we are pushing information to people instead of like having people log in Salesforce and check it out every now and then, it resulted in faster turnaround for like closing deals. So I think in the like 3 months or 2 months that implemented it, they saw like I think more than 700 deals getting like turned around fast, and the turnaround time was drastically reduced.
Thank you, Helen. And the last feature is Salesforce report. So with Workato, you can actually get a report out, essentially the raw contents of a report, and then you can take the raw data, create your own chart around it, and then distribute it out downstream. You can distribute it via email. You can make a image out of it and push it out again to sort of different kinds of chat platforms as well. So we have a couple of things there that we'd like to show.
I had a quick recipe that kind of shows like how you can trigger on like a weekly or monthly or daily basis to generate a report, right? So get report in Salesforce, and you can select like what kind of reports you have based on like what kind of reports you are
authorized.
You have permissions to view, and then.
So when you use that, this also, I mean, today to see a report, you have to log into Salesforce or you have to have Salesforce credentials. With this, you can generate a report and mail it out and people don't need to have access to Salesforce.
That's right. That's right. So that's one way you could like disseminate information, critical information, and push it out to people.
So you basically select the report that you want, and then how do you construct if you want to sort of take the raw data and create a chart out of it? How does that look like?
So if you look at what is returned from Salesforce right now, this is what we have
so this is the chart creator in Workato. So it's a special connector that takes in data, and then you can generate different types of charts. So in this case, we have selected create a columnar chart.
That's right. You can generate a pie chart as well. And so this chart takes in a list of data, right, for your y-axis and your x-axis. So you can like name it time for like your x-axis, and maybe like opportunity volume or leads converted on your name column, your x-axis.
And the
that's
data
why.
coming out from the report itself is it's a little bit of a complex data structure. It's a list of lists. So each row in the report is one list, and then each column is another list.
That's right. So so this is the report structure, and there's some like contextual data about like URLs and report ID, report name. There's like some metadata about what columns there are in this report. So in this case, this is we are getting account owner and username in the columns, and then like roles becomes like a row of data in that table.
Okay, and then sort of you pass through this chart creator, and the output of this is a image file.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, the output of it is actually a URL that brings you to the image file. So you could pass it on to a system that could render this URL.
Okay. Gautam, I'll just take a minute to launch a poll. Folks, please share your feedback on this session and how we can improve it, how we can change the format, content to make it more useful for you. Take a minute or even less to respond to this poll.
Okay, and
so Gautam, this was interesting. There's just again going back to the batch operations. There's this question around: are there certain operations that are not possible when you're moving data in batch?
Certain
operations, as in like if you have to change the value at a row level, or you have to aggregate, or like the status information, like take actions based on the status of an event, for example, the status of a case. So are there some caveats around that, like
with the batches and with batching or bulk constructs within Workato, you're working with lists. So so you are able to go down to a specific list item and sort of have complex formulas. You can basically you can do anything that you can do with a regular when it is a singleton. The only thing I would say is that when you're processing things in batch, when you have the error status for a batch is for the entire job. So if the job had 10,000 rows that it processed and 10 of them are errors, then the entire job is marked as a failed job. So I would say that is the sort of thing to think about. And of course, you can do more sort of clever things, like you can catch the exception, and then you can do a try-catch block around it, and then you can say, this is only 10. I'm going to write it out to a special place, and then in my catch, I'm going to sort of mark the job as actually successfully processed instead of having it being failed. And then you can have a special recipe that goes through these set of only failed records and do smarter things. But of course, that's a little bit extra thinking and that the end user has to do.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're almost in time. Thank you again, Gautam, Bill. This was very enlightening even for me. So folks, thanks again for joining us. The webinar video, it'll be available on product.workato.com by Monday. Take a look, and if you have additional questions, any follow-ups or suggestions, please reach out to us either on our website on live chat or send an email to support@workato.com.
Thanks, everyone. And Tridi, I'm assuming we're sharing these slides. It'll be in the recording. So you'll notice that we had we had ambitious plan to talk about several more use cases, but as you sort of look through the video, you'll see that there's some 4 or 5 other use cases that we have. And if you have any questions around that, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.